Welcome to Through the Lens of Christ, a podcast designed to have conversation about things that are happening in culture, questions that we may have theologically, and other questions that impact our day in and day out lives. Our desire is to be able to build these conversations and to be able to get us to critically think not just about the events that are happening, but how do we see these events through the lens of Christ. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope it helps you to critically think through issues in our lives.
Hello, Vince. Ashley, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. I almost said good morning, but it's not morning time this time around.
No, we mixed it up a bit, so we'll see how the brains work later in the evening. But so we're here for this episode, and I think this maybe we've done it before, but I think this is, if not the first, one of the few times that Vince and I get to be on the podcast together. So this is exciting, and he's ready to work out, got his gym equipment there, like ready to go. So I had to call it out. Apologize. But I am Steve ended up needing to be out of town, and so we thought it'd be good, since Vince preached at West Bend and I was up at North, if we shared some thoughts on kind of message and things that we kind of wrestled through the week, and figured we'd let Ashley critique both of our messages and we would go from there. So
what I do best.
So we're in Acts 14, verses 1 to 7, and so we came out of chapter 13 that we spent 4 or 5 weeks in talking about Paul in Pisidian Antioch, and how he delivers this just great gospel message in this history of God and the Israelites and God's faithfulness and their lack of faithfulness, and all leading to the point of we need a Messiah, and this idea of the fact that the gospel divides and it polarizes and it separates, and that really carries into what we see in Iconium in these first couple of verses. So Vince is going to read, and we'll get started.
Perfect. All right. All right, so starting verse 1, it says, "At Iconium, Paul and Barnabas went as usual into the Jewish synagogue. There they spoke so effectively that a great number of Jews and Greeks believed. But the Jews who refused to believe stirred up the other Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brothers. So Paul and Barnabas spent considerable time there, speaking boldly for the Lord, who confirmed the message of his grace by enabling them to perform signs and wonders. The people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews, others with the apostles. There was a plot afoot among both Gentiles and Jews, together with their leaders, to mistreat them and stone them. But they found out about it, and they fled to the Lycaonian cities of Lystra and Derbe, and to the surrounding country, where they continued to preach the gospel."
Yeah, so Luke only gives us like a real brief snippet in each of these cities that they stop in. So there's obviously a lot more that happens, but he just gives us kind of these brief little highlights. And this one is really about Paul and Barnabas preaching, and we see that they're much like we saw in the last town, that people start to believe, and the Jews reject that movement, and so they push back against it, and then we see all the response. So I guess first, like any thoughts, whether on anything that you talked about or just in general for either of you as you kind of listen through the text?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that really stands out is who uses the word afoot anymore. That's come on, NIV.
That's like my favorite part is like it's like a mystery novel, right? It's like there's a plot afoot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that really jumped out to me diving into this section is just the fact that the Jewish leaders were able to poison the minds of the other Gentiles so quickly. You know, they were so easily swayed, it seems. And it's curious how they were able to poison the minds of those Gentiles regarding this message of grace. And then I was thinking about, how does that affect our lives, and in what ways are our minds being poisoned without us even really recognizing the fact that we are being poisoned through different things in culture, society, or whatever that is. That's leading us astray.
Yeah, I think that's such a big point, right? The idea, so we think about people being saved, and even in like our local context, right? So people come to know Christ, and then what happens next, right? We just kind of assume that they're just assimilated into the body and all is well, and they immediately have this divine knowledge and everything's great and good. And we lose the fact that, Jesus himself talked about how the seeds are cast, right? And that some will take in the seed, and you'll see that it'll be this kind of thing that will start growing and it looks good, but there's no real roots. And so when things get hard, it just disappears. It withers away and fails. And so I think that happens a lot. I think that's what's happening here, is that they kind of get this message. They're like, that's really interesting, and it's so different than what we've been hearing, and this is freeing, and I love it, and I like it, and they get engaged. But there's, it seems like there's no discipleship. I mean, it's only Paul and Barnabas, and maybe John Mark, and maybe a couple other people. There's just not enough of them to actually intensely disciple people. And I just think in our time too, how many people that we've seen come in and out of the church who have, been on fire and then just kind of disappear, right? And that should break our hearts as much as people who don't know Christ.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point too, is having the church family just surrounding you, really. And one of the blessings about community is we have multiple generations within this church family, a plethora of mature believers and new believers. And it's like, man, how do we surround ourselves with those people to get us through those seasons of questions and the whys, and those things that we have to kind of wrestle with in this life, to just help kind of speak truth into those situations and those things that we're wrestling with.
Yeah. Because the world is, you brought it up earlier, but the world's actively poisoning our minds, right? Whether it's whatever it is we take. I mean, it can just be as simple as billboards on the road, right? Like everything is steering us away from Christ. And it's just easy to be poisoned. And whether or not there's we joked about it, whether or not there's a real plot afoot or not, like whether or not people are consciously trying to poison minds. I don't know that that's often true. I think that's, there's some people like that, but largely they're not actively trying to, but yet they just, right? They're under the prince of this world, right? And so they are, that's what they're bent towards. And so the world is poisoning our minds and we don't even know it.
Well, and I don't think the culture views it as they're poisoning minds. They think that they're being the most helpful and the most loving by steering people towards, you choose what your identity is and you choose who you want to be and how you want to feel, and that's your truth. They don't think that that's poison. They think that that's the most loving thing that they can be.
Yeah, that should be massively freeing, right? Yeah.
And that's one of the things we talked about a little bit with a couple other people about this idea of poisoning the minds. But how the devil, he really wants to attack the identity. And we're seeing that so much in culture right now. If he can distort our identity, then he distorts the identity of God. And it gets us in this just chaotic mess where he continues to instill all these false narratives about who we are and who God is and our relationship with God, and steers us down this very dark path. And obviously that's why it's so important to stay grounded in Scripture, grounded in the Word, so that we can continue to come back to the truth and be able to point out poison where poison is.
Yeah. Yeah, and poison doesn't just exist in the things we disagree with, right? There's poison, and we've talked about this before, but the idea of even how Christianity has almost become synonymous with Republican or conservative political viewpoints. And within that, not that it's necessarily wrong on its face, but there's poisoning in that, because we begin to find our hope in the wrong thing, right? And we begin to disorder, and we begin to not even understand where our values are coming from. We assume that our values come from a certain political party when they should come from Scripture. And I think that, again, you talked about identity, but it's where do we find that identity, and how do we make sure that the world on any side, right, seemingly good things are not actually poisoning us. I mean, the Jewish people themselves, they were trying to follow after the holiness of God, right? And it's not like they were perfect people, right? They were clearly flawed, but they were trying in some way to do the right thing. And then, in the process, they are poisoning the minds of the Gentiles. I don't think they were like, hey, we got to poison their minds and keep them from Christ. They're like, hey, God's holiness is built through the law. These people are trying to walk away from the law. We have to make sure we bring them back and make sure that they understand that they don't give up God's holiness. And, I think it can be, even with seemingly right motives, we can still find ourselves being poisoned.
It's very true. And yeah, that's why, I think that's one of the reasons why probably Paul was so compassionate to these people, is because not too long ago he was one of those guys that was trying to pull the Christians away, and he was that guy on the other side of the equation, so to speak. And so he didn't see them as the bad people versus the good people, right? It was the lost people versus the found people, essentially. Not even versus, just the lost and the found in this world. And it was his job to go and bring light into the darkness of their lives.
Yeah. And then it says, that they were bringing, even though there's all this kind of divisiveness and polarity and everything going on, it says that they were bringing the message of grace, right? And that God confirmed that message of grace through signs and wonders. And again, just kind of pointing us back to that. Yeah, there's poisoning happening. There are people that don't like the message. There's people that don't like us. There's people that are opposed to the message. There's all kind of scenarios going on, but it doesn't change what our focus should be, right? Which is both how do we live for Christ, and then also how do we share that message to others who need hope. And I just appreciate that they're anchored on this idea of the message of grace, right? Not a message of condemnation to the world, but a message of grace.
Yeah. And they were not only speaking that message of grace, but they were very much living that out as well, even within their actions, showing patience while they were there, even when they were being persecuted. They continued to stand boldly in the faith, which is definitely something I brought up. And standing boldly in the faith means definitely more than just shouting at people. It means living this out in love and bringing this message of grace along with you. As oftentimes in our lives, we do tend to fail in that boldness aspect, but that's something that as we grow in Christ, we can continue to rely on his grace through it, and grow in that boldness as well through our actions and through our words. And that's one of the beauties of this sanctification process and looking more like Christ.
Yeah, and I think you brought up the point is that we're going to talk about the things that we love. And so as if we're saying that we're a believer in Christ, but yet we have no desire to tell anybody else about it, right? That should be a signal to us that we have a heart problem. We've got a faith crisis. And if I just say that I'm a believer and I hold that to myself, and I don't want to tell anybody else because it's hard, or I don't want to tell anybody else because what will they think of me? Or then we're saying, well, then where is really my faith? And I think that was one of the points you made, is that our salvation isn't something that is just within us. It's something that should be displayed through us. And so as we're sharing this with other people, it should be evident. And it's not about, beating somebody over the head with a Bible in a Starbucks, right? It's about, how do I live my life in a way that reflects Christ? How do I make sure I'm actually sharing the good news? I'm building relationship, sharing the good news. And honestly, when things get hard, I don't think we're there yet, but when we get to a place of persecution, but we're not afraid to be separated from the world and be in favor of the things of Christ. And I think it's going to get harder and harder to do. And you talked about the difference between speaking boldly and being a coward. And I think that's what the heart of the Revelation text is getting at, is persecution is going to come. We think it's tough now, like when you're talking about end time stuff, you're talking about really hard, in your face persecution. It just, the wrath of God being poured out, people responding negatively to that, people responding negatively to other believers. And if in that moment of persecution, I still have no desire to talk about Christ or tell anyone else where my faith is, then what do I really have? And we've got to be careful that we're not just complacent or even complicit with the poisoning of the minds, but that we're actually trying to share. And so again, it's not a prescription on evangelize to everyone and be in everyone's face and condemn the world. It's I talked out of John 3:16-19 that the world's condemned already. We don't need to go out and remind them that they're condemned. Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, he came to save the world. How do we actually, we as believers should get hard messages together. We as believers should be challenged and pushed and brought out of our comfort zone. But to go out to the world and condemn them from what? They have no idea what sin is. They have no idea who God is and who Christ is and what the idea of atonement is. And so we're going to go out and condemn them. That isn't the message that Paul and Barnabas brought. They brought condemnation to the Jews because they should have known better. but they didn't bring condemnation to the world. They were bringing the message of grace. And I just think it's a huge important point that we understand.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's I forget what chapter. I think it's Romans 5, where it says it's God's kindness that draws us in, right? It's His love that draws us in. I mean, who wants to join a church that's just yelling at everybody and condemning everybody, right? That's not very appealing. It's not really demonstrating that grace of God, and it's something that we have to be very intentional about in words and in actions. Definitely when we go out into this world.
Yeah. Yeah. So put Ashley on the spot, although she's not much younger than you are, Vince. So you both can feel free to answer this. But I like when I was a kid, we were just like, the church was just coming out of this kind of hellfire and brimstone moment, right? It was like, I was born in 76, and so by the time you, like, in the 50s and 60s, right? I know it's crazy, right? That's why I don't have weights in my office. So they you come out of this movement where everybody was comfortable with the idea that I'm a sinner, right? I know what sin is. I know that I'm a sinner. And fast forward, 45, 806 years to wherever we're at now, and nobody has any idea that they're a sinner. We don't start at the same place, right? So how do we effectively evangelize to people? How do we bring a message of grace when there seems to be no need for grace? How do you bring a message of grace without condemnation first, right? Without telling them you're a sinner and explain to them how worthless they are, right? Like, how do we do that? And do you think that's a barrier to people understanding what we believe because they don't even have any concept of sin?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I think there is, yes, it is a barrier to begin with, because we don't have that baseline to start at where we all understand we're broken, sinful people. Like, that's not just a common knowledge thing, where right now the common knowledge thing is that you're perfect, you're wonderful exactly as you are. You should dig into that. And no one should be telling you anything different. And so you're starting from a place of having to, like, break their identity without being condemning. That's hard to do. And so being able to kind of navigate through that conversation of, how do you first understand hope, and how do you first understand grace, and what those things are, and then understanding the reality of the world, and then kind of navigating into that brokenness conversation, but not starting off first with that, well, you're broken and you're a sinner, and so you need grace and hope. But being able to present those things in right order, and that's in my head, like, that's what makes sense. But being able to do that in right order rather than shattering them to begin with, because nobody wants to be broken and then have it be, oh, but by the way, there's love and grace. You have to kind of lead with that in that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, no, when you asked that question, the first thing that really jumped into my head was the idea of purpose. I was reading a book by this CEO, Thomas Nelson Publishing, Michael Hyatt, and he was talking about how the millennial generation and Gen Zers, they'll take a lower paying job if they are on board with the purpose of the company and kind of the direction that they're going. And so I think a lot of these younger generations are really hungry for purpose and understanding, why are they here? What is their purpose in life? And if we can get them to understand their purpose, then to understand how they're not fulfilling that purpose outside of Christ, then that is really the avenue to bring in, well, why are you here? Get into the creation story and bring in the gospel message. And I know I've talked to a few younger people about just purpose and prying those why questions, and it seems to get pretty decent response from what I've had, but it at least leads to some greater discussion.
Yeah, I think both things are hitting it on the head, right? The idea of we just have to come at this from a different angle, and I think we're at a crossroads where you've got the generation above me is talking in a language that they were used to, and I even feel it on Sunday mornings, right? You deliver a hard message, and there's a group of people who are like, yes, that was amazing, and that is good, and do that, right? And then you deliver like a soft message, and you've got like the younger group going like, that was so meaningful and that meant so much to me. And I just think, we're talking to these two different people who hear things differently. How do we figure out, how do we translate and speak the right language so that not that we change the message at all, right? But that we change the delivery, right? The method of how we deliver the message. And yeah, because we don't want to, the world is basically, at least in my estimation, is saying that Christianity is a condemning religion, right? So if the Christians are talking to you, they're going to tell you you're not right and you're wrong and you're horrible, right? And that, again, that misses the message of grace, right? So, you know, anytime you start sharing Christ, people are hearing it through the lens of, well, you hate all these groups, and so then you're just, that's not love at all. So I'm going to tune that out. And then, you know, how do you start to tell people what you really believe with working through that barrier? I agree with what Vince, you were talking about the idea of purpose, right? I mean, that's you know, that idea of purpose has changed over the years. I mean, again, going back to my history, like when I was a kid, your purpose was, not everybody went to college. So it was, you're going to go to college, right? All the parents were pushing that all their kids go to college, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what success looks like, and this is what it looks like. And so you had that kind of purpose baked in, right? This is what I'm going to do. And I think the generation today is going, that doesn't look very fulfilling, right? I see a whole lot of people in their 40s and 50s who make a lot of money who seem to be really miserable, and their lives seem to be super messy, right? So, okay, that's not it. So it must mean I'll make less and I'll travel and have experiences and hang out with friends, and right. And they're just trying to find purpose in a different way. And they're going to find out that that purpose fails too, right? In 20 years, the two generations below them are going to be like, well, I don't want to do that, right? What have they done with their lives? And they haven't, you know, like, so I think we're trying to fill all the gaps because our minds are being poisoned, and we don't understand what actual true purpose and what true grace looks like. And yeah, we got to figure out how to speak that language.
Well, and you look at how it's evolved. I think we've talked about this before, but my generation has everything at its fingertips now of, you know, I can go and I can make my career on the internet, or I can go be in corporate, or I can go work in ministry. It's, you know, you have thousands of options of what you want to do. But in the 1800s, your career was decided for you on wherever you were born.
What is 1976, not 1876.
I thought you were just
I just want to be clear. Like I'm old, but I'm not like. So.
But you go back even further from that.
oh no, I just wanted to clarify. So got it.
And the place, you know, the town and the church that you were born into was also the one that you were baptized in, the one you got married in, and the one that you died in. And whatever your dad's job was what your job was. And it was all decided for you, and you didn't leave your town. You know, you were in a 20-mile radius of where you were born your entire life. And so then you look at today and these next generations, and they can go literally anywhere and do anything. And so that, I think that idea of purpose is even bigger for them to grasp on it. You know, those smaller things weren't decided for them. So now they're supposed to decide everything about their life and what they believe spiritually and how they think about God, and, you know, all of those things. That's a huge thing to have to grasp and understand. And having those choices now be, you know, make these when you're 10 years old is huge.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, we're still learning really what the consequences of that is, of the technology ages. I mean, we're still learning about what that does in the long term. And obviously, I think, you know, anxiety and depression has been skyrocketing right now. And so bringing the message of really peace, I think, is kind of a hot topic message to bring right now through, you know, the Christian perspective and through the gospel message. And I think a lot of people are looking for peace, and they're reaching for everything. And, you know, whether that be a medicine cabinet to try to find peace through prescription, or whether that be through different practices, yoga, all that kind of stuff, it's all going to fail, and they're all going to realize that too. And there's only one source of peace in this world, and it's through Christ.
Yeah. And it's how do you bring that message? I mean, everything you guys just talked about is it's peace, and it's hope, and it's like these are all good things, right? And so you've got all these good things that we're trying to share with people, and they're not receiving it. And so it's how do we continue to try to figure out where culture is, and to know that, I mean, to your point on technology advances, like it opens up so many doors, it also opens up a whole lot of avenues for false teaching and to learn false things, and again, to be further poisoned. And how do you find a group when, well, I'll look at it and go, man, your mind's being poisoned. Well, if I go tell somebody their mind's being poisoned, what are they going to say, right? Like, no, of course it's not. What are you talking about, right? My mind's not being poisoned. So I think to what you guys are saying is that it goes back to what Paul and Barnabas did. It's the message of grace, right? How do we bring a message of hope to an already condemned world so that they might know there is purpose greater than what the world tells them, and that there is a perfected purpose, and there is a perfected grace and a perfected hope, and we don't have to chase after all the other things that just leave us with bigger voids.
Absolutely.
Well, we can talk about this stuff for a while. I think we're probably out of time, but appreciate it. Good conversation, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys.